My family refused to help me when I was terminally ill. They were celebrating my sister's wedding. I don't know if I just needed to get this off my chest or if I'm looking for validation, but I want to share what growing up in my family was like. Maybe someone out there can relate. I was the firstborn, but you'd never guess that if you walked into my parents' house. If you stepped into their living room, you'd think they had only one child, my younger sister, Lisa. Every wall, every shelf, every possible surface was dedicated to her achievements. Trophies, medals, certificates, framed newspaper clippings. It was like a shrine to her success. And me? There wasn't a single picture of me on display. If I hadn't lived there my whole life, I would have thought I was a guest. The thing is, it's not like I was some rebellious or troubled kid. I did everything I was supposed to. I got good grades. I played soccer and later switched to track. I even worked after school. But none of that mattered because Lisa was exceptional. At least, that's what my parents always told me. She was a competitive gymnast from a young age, and I'll admit, she was good. But the way my parents treated her, you'd think she was training for the Olympics. They went to every single one of her competitions. If I had a game or a track meet on the same day, well, too bad. Lisa's event was more important. That was the phrase I heard over and over again. I can count on one hand the number of times they showed up for me. Even then, it was usually because Lisa's practice had been canceled, and they suddenly had nothing else to do. And let me tell you, their presence wasn't exactly supportive. They'd sit there, bored, checking their phones, counting down the minutes until they could leave. Then afterward, instead of asking how I did, my mom would say something like, "Lisa has a big tournament next weekend. You should be cheering her on." I tried not to let it get to me. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. I had friends, I had coaches who believed in me, and I had my own goals. But when you grow up feeling like an afterthought in your own family, it messes with you in ways you don't even realize until later. It wasn't just about sports, either. Every birthday, every holiday, every family event was an opportunity to celebrate Lisa. If I got a B on a test, they'd remind me that Lisa got an A. If I saved up to buy something with my own money, they'd say Lisa deserved something too, even though she never worked a day in her life. And yet, through all of it, I never once confronted them about it. I guess part of me hoped that one day, they'd recognize me too. Spoiler alert, they didn't. This is just the beginning, but I figured I'd start here. Let me know if this sounds crazy, or if anyone else grew up in a house like this. By the time I was 16, I had already accepted that if I wanted anything in life, I had to get it myself. So, I started working construction jobs during the summer. It was tough, but I liked the independence. While other kids were spending their breaks traveling with their families, I was waking up at 5 a.m. to haul materials in the sun. And honestly, I didn't mind. At least at work, I wasn't invisible. By 18, I was done. I moved out the second I could, renting a tiny apartment that barely had space for a bed and a fridge. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I was working full-time, mostly manual labor, and while it wasn't easy, it felt a hell of a lot better than staying in a house where I didn't matter. Meanwhile, back at home, my parents were busy throwing Lisa the most extravagant Sweet 16 party you could imagine. We're talking venue, catering, DJ, custom decorations, even a damn professional photographer. I later found out they spent more on that one night than I did on my entire first year of rent. To put things in perspective, when I turned 16, my parents gave me a birthday dinner at home. Just the usual meal, but with a cake at the end. No party, no gifts, nothing. When I turned 18 and officially became an adult, my mom sent me a 2-line text, "Happy birthday. Hope you're doing well." That was it. No mention of my moving out, no asking if I needed anything. I doubt they even noticed I was gone. While I was working 10-hour shifts, Lisa was in college, switching majors every semester. She started with business, then journalism, then psychology. Every time she got bored, my parents just nodded and paid for whatever she wanted next. Meanwhile, I was learning everything the hard way: how to budget, how to fix things in my apartment, how to survive on my own. And the best part? They still expected me to show up for Lisa's milestones. Her college decision day, her first internship, her big moves. They'd send me texts like, "Come celebrate with us," as if I was some distant family friend, not their son. I didn't respond. I was too busy building a life that wasn't centered around her. Let me know if you guys want more. This is only the beginning. By 28, I had finally started feeling like I was getting somewhere. I had worked my way up in construction, managing projects instead of just breaking my back every day. I had a decent place, a good group of friends, and a work ethic that made sure I never had to rely on anyone, especially not my family. Then, out of nowhere, my body started betraying me. At first, it was just little things. I'd feel winded faster than usual, even though I was in decent shape. Then the chest pain started. It wasn't constant at first, just a dull ache that would come and go. I figured it was nothing. I'd been lifting heavy materials for years, maybe I pulled something. But then it got worse. Way worse. One day on site, I was lifting a stack of drywall when a sharp, crushing pain shot through my chest. I had to drop everything and sit down, struggling to breathe. My crew thought I was having a heart attack. My buddy Miguel, one of the guys who always had my back, called me an idiot and practically dragged me to the hospital himself. I hated hospitals. I hated doctors. I hadn't seen one in years. But this wasn't something I could shake off. After a bunch of tests, the doctor came back with a look on his face that made my stomach drop. It wasn't my heart. It was a tumor. A damn tumor pressing on my lungs, growing silently for who knows how long. And if I didn't get surgery soon, I might not have a chance to fix it. I sat there, numb, as they explained the costs. Surgery, treatment, recovery. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. And since I had been working freelance jobs and contract work for years, I had no insurance. No backup plan. No safety net. For the first time in a long time, I was truly, utterly stuck. I didn't know what to do. I had spent my whole life making sure I never had to ask anyone for help. And now, I was looking at a price tag that made survival feel like a luxury I couldn't afford. I didn't want to call my family. I didn't even know if they'd care. But as much as I hated to admit it, I was running out of options. Let me know if you guys want to hear what happened next. This was the hardest part of my life. After the hospital visit, my friends stepped up in a way I never expected. My construction crew, the guys I worked with every day, didn't hesitate for a second. Miguel started a fundraiser, and the whole team chipped in. Some of them barely made enough to support their own families, but they still threw in whatever they could. A few of the guys even reached out to local charities, but the amount we raised was nowhere near enough. Surgery, hospital fees, post-op care, it was an impossible number. I was out of options. For the first time in 10 years, I swallowed my pride and called my parents. I didn't want to. I didn't even know what to say. I just sat there, staring at the phone for an hour before I finally dialed. When my mom picked up, she sounded surprised to hear from me. Not worried, not concerned, just surprised. Like she had forgotten I existed. I told her everything. The pain, the tumor, the cost. I laid it all out, hoping that, at least in a life or death situation, they'd step up. Silence. Then my dad cleared his throat and said, "Well, that's really unfortunate, Alex. But all our savings are tied up in Lisa's wedding." I thought I misheard him. What? We're covering the venue, catering, and her honeymoon, my mom added, like she was explaining something obvious. You know how important this is for her. I sat there, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. I have cancer. My voice cracked. And you're telling me Lisa's wedding is more important? My mom sighed. Sighed. Like I was being dramatic. It's her special day, Alex. You've always been independent. You'll figure something out. I don't remember hanging up. I barely remember anything after that. I just sat in my tiny apartment, staring at the wall, trying to process the fact that my parents had just told me, in the clearest way possible, that my life didn't matter to them. It wasn't even about the money anymore. It was about the fact that I had finally given them the chance to show me that I meant something. And they didn't. I wasn't their son. I was just an afterthought. I didn't call them again. But what happened next? That was something none of us saw coming. Let me know if you want to hear the rest. After that phone call, I knew I was on my own. Again. So, I did what I had always done. I figured it out myself. I started selling everything I owned. My car? Gone. My tools? Sold to guys on the crew who promised to keep them in good hands. My appliances, my furniture. If it wasn't nailed down, I listed it. The hardest thing to let go of was my grandfather's watch. It was the only thing I had of his, the only thing in my life that had ever made me feel connected to family. I didn't wear it much, but I kept it in a little box in my nightstand. Selling it felt like losing a piece of myself. But what choice did I have? A watch wouldn't save my life. Through it all, my friends never left my side. They kept adding to the fundraiser, passing around collection jars at work, calling in every favor they could. Miguel practically turned into my personal bodyguard, making sure I was eating, making sure I was sleeping. If I ever doubted what real family looked like, these guys showed me. But even with all that, we still weren't even close to covering the costs. And then, out of nowhere, something incredible happened. A big construction company, one of the ones we all knew about but never worked for, heard about my situation. Apparently, the owner had lost his brother to the same type of tumor I had. When he found out what was happening, he called me personally. "I know what this fight looks like," he said. "I couldn't save my brother, but maybe I can help you." And just like that, his company covered 40% of my surgery costs. No questions, no strings attached. I was speechless. I tried to refuse at first. I wasn't used to people helping me without expecting something in return. But he just told me, "Don't waste time being proud. Get the surgery. Get better." Thanks to him, and thanks to my crew, I got the operation. I still had to take on a massive amount of debt, but I was alive. And that was more than I could say a few months before. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, I had a chance. And not because of the people who were supposed to love me, but because of the people who chose to. But just when I thought I had cut my parents out for good, life had other plans. Let me know if you want the next part. It's a wild one. I woke up after surgery feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. Breathing was painful, moving was worse, and some days, even opening my eyes felt like too much. I'd always thought of myself as tough. I'd spent my life working through injuries, pushing past exhaustion, and never asking for help. But this was different. The doctors warned me recovery would be long. They weren't kidding. For weeks, I could barely get out of bed. Every breath felt like I was inhaling fire. I couldn't work, I could barely eat, and the medical debt hanging over my head felt like a mountain I'd never climb. But the thing that kept me going? My friends. The guys from my crew showed up for me every single day. They brought food, checked in on me, and even covered some of my rent when I couldn't afford it. Miguel, the same guy who had dragged me to the hospital in the first place, practically moved in just to make sure I didn't try anything stupid, like going back to work too soon. And my parents? Nothing. Not a single call. Not a text. Not a damn word. Lisa got married while I was in the middle of chemo. I wasn't invited, of course. I only found out because someone sent me a picture, her, in a designer dress, standing in front of the giant wedding arch my parents had spent their reserved savings on. I stared at that photo for a long time. Then I deleted it. I was done with them. Instead of wasting energy on people who never cared, I focused on getting stronger. Day by day, step by step, I fought my way back. It took over a year before I could even think about going back to work, and even then, I wasn't the same. But I was still standing. That had to count for something. And then, out of nowhere, an opportunity landed in my lap. A big development company reached out, looking for someone to help manage a new construction project. It wasn't just any project, it was a medical center. At first, I hesitated. I had never worked on something like that before. But then I thought about everything I had been through, how much I had learned about hospitals, treatment centers, and the absolute hell of navigating the healthcare system. Who better to build a place like that than someone who had been on the other side of it? I took the job, and that job changed everything. I poured everything I had into that project. I studied every inch of the blueprints, worked closely with doctors and architects, and made sure that every detail made sense, not just for the patients, but for the people working there. By the time we finished, I had built something I was proud of. And more than that, I had proven to myself that I wasn't just some guy who barely survived. I was someone who could create. After that, offers started rolling in. Turns out, specializing in medical construction was a niche with huge demand. Within a few years, I had more projects than I could handle. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. I started my own company. It wasn't easy, and it sure as hell wasn't instant. But one contract led to another, and before I knew it, I was running a successful business. A real business. The kind my parents probably would have bragged about, if they had ever cared enough to ask. But here's the thing. I didn't need them anymore. The people who stood by me, they were my real family. The guys who emptied their pockets to help me survive. The company owner who covered part of my surgery. The crew who never let me feel alone. Those were the people who mattered. And for the first time in my life, I was happy. But just when I thought I had finally moved past my parents for good, they came crawling back. And trust me, you're going to want to hear this one. A few months ago, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to pick up. It was my mother. Her voice was different, hesitant, almost small. I barely recognized it. For a second, I thought maybe something had happened to Lisa. But no, it wasn't about her. It was about them. Turns out, my father had made the worst financial decision of his life. He had taken all their savings and invested it into some guaranteed real estate deal. Some guy had promised huge returns, no risk, just easy money. It was, of course, a scam. They lost everything. Their accounts were drained, their house was on the line, and to top it off, my father had taken out loans to try to recover what he lost. Loans he now couldn't pay back. They were drowning. And their first instinct? Turned to Lisa. Lisa, their golden child. The one they had poured every dollar into. The one they built their whole world around. But here's the twist. Lisa had married a lawyer. And not just any lawyer, but one who knew exactly how to protect his assets. When my parents showed up at her door, she didn't even let them inside. Her husband shut them down so fast they didn't even have time to beg. So, with nowhere else to go, they called the son they abandoned. Me. I sat there, listening to my mother actually crying on the phone. She told me they had nowhere to turn, that the bank was about to seize the house, that my father's health was suffering from the stress. Then, she said it. The words I never thought I'd hear from her. Alex, we need you. I won't lie, Reddit. That moment was satisfying. Not because they were suffering, I wouldn't wish that on anyone, but because for the first time, they realized I existed, and that they needed me more than I ever needed them. I let her talk. I let her cry. I let her beg. Then, when she finally finished, I asked her one simple question. Where were you when I needed you? Silence. No excuses, no explanations, just silence. Because she knew. She knew exactly what they had done. After a long pause, she whispered, I'm sorry. I took a deep breath, looked around at my life, the life I built, without them, and said, I hope Lisa's wedding was worth it. And then I hung up. I haven't heard from them since. A week after my mother's desperate phone call, my father tried a different approach. Instead of calling, he showed up at my office. I don't know how he found out where I worked, but one afternoon, I walked out of a meeting and there he was, standing in the lobby like he actually belonged there. For a second, I just stared at him. It had been years since I'd last seen him in person, and the man in front of me looked old. Not just physically, but in the way he carried himself. The arrogant, confident father I once knew was gone, replaced by someone who looked defeated. Alex, he said, forcing a smile. I was hoping we could talk. I wanted to turn around and leave. But a part of me, maybe the part that still had unresolved anger, wanted him to say it to my face. So, I let him outside. He got straight to the point. He and my mom needed $50,000 to avoid losing their home. $50,000, just about the same amount they had spent on the photographer at Lisa's wedding. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was pathetic. He rambled about how they had supported Lisa for years, expecting her to help them when the time came, and how she had turned her back on them. How he and my mother had made mistakes, but were still my parents. How family takes care of each other. That one nearly sent me over the edge. I took a deep breath, looked him in the eyes, and said, Fine. You want to talk about family? Let's go somewhere. Then I got in my truck and told him to follow me. I drove him straight to one of the biggest projects I had ever worked on, the medical center. The place that existed because of my struggle. My crew was there, the men who had stood by me through everything. Miguel, the guy who had practically saved my life, was the first to greet us. My father looked at him, then at the others, and for the first time, I saw something click in his eyes. This was my family. Not him. Not my mother. Not Lisa. I turned to him and said, This place? It exists because of people who actually gave a damn about me. Not because of you. He opened his mouth, but I wasn't done. When I was dying, you told me to figure it out on my own because Lisa's wedding was more important. Well, now you're the ones drowning. So figure it out on your own. His face fell. He looked around, maybe hoping someone would step in, but my crew just stood behind me, silent and solid. For once, he had no excuses. No justifications. No way to twist things in his favor. I shook my head. No, I'm not giving you a cent. And then I turned around and walked away. He didn't try to stop me. Didn't call after me. He just stood there, alone, in front of the building I had helped create. And that was the last time I ever saw him. After I walked away from my father that day at the medical center, I knew I was truly done. There was no more anger, no more frustration, just a simple, quiet understanding that I owed them nothing. And life? Well, it did what it always does. It moved on. My parents lost everything. The house. Gone. The bank took it when they couldn't pay back the loans. Their savings? Already wiped out from my father's stupid investment. Their social life? Shattered. Turns out, when you build your entire existence around money and appearances, people disappear the second you have nothing left to offer. And Lisa? She cut them off completely. I don't know if it was her lawyer husband's influence or just pure self-preservation, but the moment she realized they were financial dead weight, she stopped answering their calls. They had spent their entire lives bending over backward for her, giving her everything, and in the end, she tossed them aside like they never mattered. Sound familiar? That's the thing about karma. It doesn't forget. As for me, I built something real. My business kept growing, and I found success on my own terms. But more importantly, I found something my parents never had, a family that actually loved me. A few years after my surgery, I met someone. She wasn't impressed by my money, my success, or anything material. I swear, she would have loved me just as much when I was broke and living in that tiny apartment. She saw me, and that was enough. Now, we're married. And just a few weeks ago, we found out we're expecting our first child. When I heard the news, I thought back to everything that had happened. My childhood, my struggle, my parents' betrayal. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't angry about it anymore. Because now, I get to break the cycle. I get to be the kind of father mine never was. I get to build the kind of family I always wanted. And as for my parents, I have no idea where they are now. Maybe they found a way to scrape by, or maybe they're still hoping Lisa will change her mind. But the truth is, I don't care. They made their choices, and I made mine. Real karma doesn't always come in the way we expect. But in the end, my parents got exactly what they deserved. And me? I got everything I ever wanted. Thanks for reading, Reddit.